day. My bag, my mailbox, my driveway. And my husband standing in the kitchen window of my house on my land with a woman I had never met unpacking boxes. I want you to understand something about that moment. I didn't cry. I didn't get out of the car and bang on the door. I didn't call anyone in a panic. I sat there for maybe 90 seconds. I counted the gravel stones in front of my tire, which is a strange thing to do, but that's where I was. And then I reached across to the passenger seat, picked up the legal pad I keep there, and wrote 4 words. Call Gideon. Document everything. Then I drove 200 yards east to my mother's house on the same piece of land, and I let myself breathe. Now, if you're already asking yourself how in the world we got here, how a woman ends up locked out of her own home by her own husband while another woman moves in, I promise I'm going to tell you everything. But before I take you back to the beginning, if you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe so you don't miss where this goes. Like this video if you think you're going to need to know how it ends. And leave me a comment right now. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? I read every single one of those comments, and it genuinely matters to me who's on the other side of this. Okay, let me take you back. I grew up in Harlan County, Kentucky. And when I say that, I don't mean it as an excuse for anything or a piece of local color. I mean that the land I grew up on is the actual foundation of everything that happened to me. Literally. The land my great-grandfather purchased in 1953, 34 acres on a ridge outside of Harlan, the kind of property that wasn't worth much to anybody else, but was worth everything to us. My father, Eldon Spalding, was a land surveyor. He knew every boundary line in that county the way other men know the stats of their favorite baseball team. He kept records, deeds, surveys, easements, title chains, in a gray metal filing cabinet in the hallway that we were not allowed to touch. The filing cabinet was the most important piece of furniture in our house. I understood that before I understood almost anything else. My mother, Vera, ran the home with a kind of practical severity that I used to mistake for coldness and now understand was simply competence. She did not waste words. She did not perform warmth. But if something needed doing, she did it completely, correctly, without complaint. Growing up, I used to wish she was softer. Now I look in the mirror and I see her, and I don't wish anything at all. There were no siblings, just me and the land and my father's filing cabinet and the unspoken rule that Spaldings do not give away what's theirs. I was 11 years old when a neighbor, a man named Gerald Holt, who owned the property to the east of ours, decided he had been using a strip of our land for long enough that it legally belonged to him. Adverse possession. Look it up. The short version is, in some states, if you use someone's land openly and continuously for enough years, you can make a legal claim to it. Gerald Holt had been parking equipment on the edge of our property for 15 years, and he walked into a county office and filed a claim. My father did not raise his voice. He did not go to Gerald Holt's door. He went to his filing cabinet, pulled out a manila folder, spread survey maps across the kitchen table. I remember the sound of them unfolding, that papery snap. And 6 weeks later, he stood in front of a county judge and dismantled Gerald Holt's claim in about 40 minutes. I sat in the back of that courtroom. I was wearing my good coat, the one with the velvet collar, and my feet didn't quite touch the floor. I watched my father speak quietly and precisely and show documents that could not be argued with. I have never forgotten what it looked like when paperwork won. And if you've ever had something that was rightfully yours, something you built, something you inherited, something you simply earned, treated like it was up for debate, like it was negotiable, like someone else had more of a right to it than you did just because they were louder or more confident or more willing to make a scene, I think you already know where this story is going. And I think you understand exactly why I am telling it. If this is already hitting somewhere close, go ahead and like this video. Subscribe if you haven't. Share it with someone who needs to hear that being quiet is not the same as being defeated. And let me keep going. I paid for college myself, partial scholarship, and the rest I worked for. Weekends at a title insurance office in Lexington, which turned out to be one of those accidentally perfect decisions that you don't recognize as such until much later. I graduated with a degree in business administration. I did not go to law school, but I accumulated 12 years of practical property law knowledge that I would argue is worth more than most JDs when it comes to reading a title chain. I became a senior title examiner at Cumberland Valley Abstract and Title in Middlesboro. My job is to find the places where the record doesn't tell a clean story. The gaps, the errors, the moments where someone assumed something that the documents don't actually support. I am very good at my job. I met Dale Whitmore at 31 at a hardware store in Middlesboro, of all the ordinary places. He was charming in the way that some men are charming, immediately, effortlessly, with just enough self-deprecation to seem trustworthy. He was a contractor. He knew how to build things. He seemed solid to me, and I think I confused the performance of solidity with the actual thing. We married 2 years later. He was 35, I was 31. The early years were not bad at all, actually. There were seasons of the marriage that were genuinely good. I want to be honest about that. Dale was not a monster. He was a man with a particular blind spot, and that blind spot was me. We built a house on a portion of my family's land. He did much of the physical construction himself, which I know he was proud of, and which I genuinely respected at the time. We poured that concrete, we framed those walls, we chose those windows together. What we did not do, what Dale did not think to do, or perhaps thought to do and assumed would resolve itself later, was put his name on the land we built it on. Because the land was mine. The deed was in my name, recorded with the Harlan County Clerk of Courts, granted to me by my father's estate when Eldon Spalding passed 3 years ago. A deed of gift, a clean transfer, the kind my father had been preparing since before I graduated college. Dale was at the kitchen table the afternoon the attorney explained it to us. He nodded. He shook the attorney's hand. He said, "That's great, sweetheart," and went back to reading his phone. He never thought about it again. I never stopped thinking about it. The marriage cooling is not a dramatic story. There was no single moment where everything broke. There was a long, slow withdrawal. On his side first, then on mine in response. Like two people standing on opposite ends of a dock, each taking small steps backward until you look up one day and realize the distance is not crossable anymore. I noticed the new watch he bought himself in March. I noticed the texts he would turn face down on the counter. I noticed the way he stopped asking about my work, stopped sitting at the table at dinner, stopped being anywhere that required him to be present with me. I noticed. And then I called a divorce attorney in Corbin named Gideon Marsh on a Wednesday in February, and I made an appointment and I brought my folder. I always have a folder. By October, I had spent 8 months preparing for the conversation I knew was coming. I had pulled every document. I had confirmed the title chain. I had verified 3 times, because that's who I am, that Dale Mitchell Whitmore's name appeared nowhere in the recorded land records. Not on the original parcel, not on the survey, not on any amendment, easement, or instrument filed with the county in the 12 years we had been married. I was waiting for the right moment to move. He moved first. And when I sat at the end of that gravel driveway in October, looking at my bag against my mailbox, I felt something I recognized. Not fear. Not even anger, not really. It was the same feeling I had at 11 years old in that courtroom, watching Gerald Holt's attorney realize that my father had a folder and the folder was going to win. I felt ready. I drove to my mother's house. She poured me coffee without asking. I sat down at her kitchen table and I said, "He changed the locks." And Vera Spalding, who has never in her life wasted a word, looked at me across that table and said, "He can change whatever he wants in that house. He can't change what's underneath it." I wrapped both hands around that coffee cup. I said, "I know, Mom." And she nodded. The particular single nod she uses when a matter is closed, and reached over and turned up the radio. And that was the morning of it. Dale texted me at 11:47 that morning. I know the exact time because I photographed the screen before I read it all the way through. That's just how my brain works now. Document first, feel later. The text said, "Your stuff is by the mailbox. We need to talk about next steps. I think this is better for both of us." I read it twice. I took the photograph. I forwarded it to Gideon's office with a 3-word message. It has started. Then I set my phone face down on my mother's kitchen table and finished my coffee. What nobody tells you about a betrayal that you saw coming is that it still lands. The preparation doesn't cushion the impact the way you think it will. You can know something intellectually. You can have known it for 8 months. Can have built a legal strategy around it, can have a folder in your filing cabinet at work with every relevant document organized by date. And the moment it becomes real, becomes a Tuesday morning and a bag in a driveway and another woman's boxes stacked in your living room, something in your chest still drops. Not all the way, but enough. I sat at my mother's table for another hour. Vera moved around the kitchen doing the things she always does, rinsing dishes, wiping the counter, checking the bird feeder through the window, not asking me anything. That's her version of comfort. She doesn't crowd you. She just stays close enough that you know you're not alone, and she trusts you to speak when you're ready. I wasn't ready yet. So I watched her hands, her small, careful hands, with Eldon's watch sliding loose around her left wrist, and I let myself sit inside the wrongness of the morning without trying to fix it yet. Dale called at 2:00. I answered. I had decided I would answer. It was important to me that I not be the person who disappeared, who went silent, who let fear or hurt make the decisions. Whatever I was going to do, I was going to do it with my eyes open and my voice steady. "Renata." He said my name like a statement, not a question, not a greeting, just confirmation that I'd picked up. "Dale, I think you know what's happening here. I'm not trying to be cruel about this. I think it's time. I think we both know it's time. I let a moment pass. I agree with you, I said. It is time. Silence. He had prepared for crying or anger. My agreement threw him off his script entirely, and I could feel him recalibrating. We'll need to figure out the house, he said, recovering. I think we can be reasonable adults about the house. We will absolutely need to talk about the property, I said. There are some things about the situation you're going to need to understand. I think at this point, it's better to let the attorneys handle the details. You'll be hearing from Gideon Marsh's office. A pause. You have an attorney. I've had an attorney since February, Dale. Another silence. Longer this time. You're not going to make this easy, he said finally. And there was something in his voice, not quite anger, not quite surprise. The specific tone of a man who has just realized the woman he underestimated has been 3 steps ahead of him for the better part of a year. I don't think either of us gets to define what easy looks like right now, I said. Go enjoy your evening. I hung up. I want you to sit with that for a second because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, did he even consider for one moment whose name was on that land? Did he ever ask? Did he ever look? He didn't. I am completely certain of that. Because Dale is the kind of man who assumes. He assumes things are his when he has been near them long enough. He built that house with his hands, and in his mind, that made it his. The way you might feel a book belongs to you because you've read it 3 times, regardless of whose name is on the spine. He was so certain of his position that he didn't check the foundation of it. Not once in 12 years. And I keep thinking about what it means to be that certain of something you've never verified. To stake everything, your next relationship, another woman's stability, your whole plan for the future, on an assumption you never once thought to confirm. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never thought to check? Or have you been on the other side of it, the person who was watching someone walk confidently in the wrong direction, knowing what was coming, waiting for the right moment? I want to know. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and I mean that. Because this specific thing, the gap between what someone believes they own and what the record actually says, it's not just a property question. It runs through everything: relationships, families, histories. And I think a lot of you know exactly what I mean. Gideon Marsh filed the formal notice the following Monday. I was not present when Dale received it. I was at my desk in Middlesboro, examining a title chain for a property in Letcher County, a completely unrelated matter involving a boundary dispute from 1978. Doing my job, drinking bad office coffee from a mug with a chip in the handle. Perfectly ordinary. The paperwork was working without me. Gideon told me later that Dale's first call after receiving the notice was to his brother Corey, who recommended a lawyer out of Barberville who primarily handled DUIs and basic estate matters. Not a property specialist, not a title attorney, just a guy Corey knew. I don't say that with cruelty. I say it because it tells you everything about how seriously Dale had thought through his position. What Gideon's notice said, in the careful and precise language of legal correspondence, was this: the residential structure in which Dale Whitmore was currently residing was situated on 34 acres of land belonging exclusively to Renata Lynn Spalding, as recorded with the Harlan County Clerk of Courts, deed book and page numbers attached, survey attached, complete title chain going back to 1953 attached. Dale's name appeared on no recorded instrument connected to that land. The structure itself, as an improvement built upon land without a separate deed, without a lease agreement, without any legal instrument establishing independent ownership of the building apart from the underlying parcel, was subject to the property rights proceeding being initiated. Dale's attorney, once he had actually read through the documents, called Dale and said words that I am told had to be repeated twice before they were understood. You built a house on her land. Your name is not on the land. The house sits on the land. That is a significant legal problem. And Dale said, I built that house. I framed it. I did the plumbing rough-in, the finish work. I built it. And the attorney said, I understand that. The question of what you built is separate from the question of title. Title is answered by the deed. The deed says Renata Spalding. I only know this because Gideon told me, with the carefully neutral expression of a man who has seen a great many people discover too late that assumption is not the same as documentation. Meanwhile, there was Brianna. I want to be careful here because it would be easy and maybe satisfying in a small, cheap way to make Brianna the villain of this part of the story. She isn't. She is a 34-year-old woman who came out of a bad first marriage, who was looking for something stable, who heard Dale describe a house and a property and an established life and believed him. She quit her apartment. She gave up her deposit. She moved her things across 2 weekends in a car and borrowed truck. She had dressed for a beginning. Soft pink top, light jeans, the careful outfit of someone who wants to make a good impression on a place they are about to call home. She was in the middle of someone else's ending, and nobody had told her. When Dale explained the situation to her, not all at once, not fully, the way you explain something when you are still hoping it isn't quite as bad as it looks, Brianna sat at the kitchen table in that house and went very still. You told me this was your house, she said. It is, on your land. There was a long pause, and Dale said the thing that a certain kind of man always says when the floor gives way beneath him. It's complicated. Brianna looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked to the bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed that had been remade with her sheets, her quilt, her decorative pillows that she'd carried in a laundry bag. And she was very quiet. I wasn't there for any of this. I was at my mother's house at night, in my childhood bedroom, in the bed I slept in from age 4 to age 18, looking at the same ceiling I looked at as a girl. The wallpaper in that room is pale yellow with a small repeated pattern of wheat stalks. I had stared at it so many times as a child that I had memorized the repeat. Every 14 inches, the pattern starts again. I lay there and I looked at the wheat stalks and I thought about Brianna sitting on that bed. And I felt not satisfaction, something more complicated than that. Something closer to tiredness and grief for everyone involved in the wreckage of a man's assumptions, including myself. Including the version of me who stood in that kitchen 12 years ago and felt, for the first time, like someone had chosen her. I picked up my phone and I called Gideon and I said, let's move forward. He said, I've been ready since February, Renata. I said, I know. I needed to be ready too. And I put down the phone and I turned off the lamp. And I looked at the wheat stalk wallpaper in the dark, and I let myself feel all of it. The grief and the anger and the strange, quiet, terrible relief of a thing that has finally, irrevocably begun. I have always prepared for things the way my father taught me to prepare. Not with urgency, not with drama, but with the slow accumulation of everything that cannot be argued with. Documents, dates, recorded facts. The kind of evidence that doesn't require you to raise your voice because it speaks at a volume no one can talk over. In the 2 weeks between Gideon filing the notice and the formal property proceeding, I prepared. I went into the office at Cumberland Valley every day. I examined title chains. I drank the bad coffee. I answered my emails. I spoke to my colleagues in the same measured way I always had, and none of them knew, or if they suspected something was different about me, they were polite enough not to say so. There is a woman in my office named Paulette who has been a title examiner for 31 years and who can read a person's emotional state the way she reads a deed, thoroughly and without comment. One afternoon, she set a piece of chocolate on the edge of my desk, said nothing, and walked back to her office. That was the entirety of her acknowledgement that something was happening in my life. I ate the chocolate. I kept working. At home, at my mother's home, I used the kitchen table after dinner to lay out my own documents. The original deed, the survey map my father had commissioned in 2019, 2 years before he died, when he first began the process of transferring the land to me. The deed of gift, signed and notarized and recorded, clean as anything I had ever examined professionally. I had handled hundreds of title chains in my career, tangled ones, broken ones, chains where some document from 1962 was missing and the whole thing had to be reconstructed from tax records and courthouse archives. Mine was not like that. Mine was a straight line from 1953 to my name, uninterrupted, unambiguous. Gideon called me on a Thursday evening. He had received something from Dale's attorney, a counter-argument of sorts, which Gideon described to me with the careful neutrality of a man trying not to editorialize. He's arguing constructive contribution, Gideon said. The position is that Dale's labor in constructing the home and his ongoing maintenance of the property over 12 years of marriage constitutes a sufficient claim to the structure itself, even absent his name on the underlying land deed. I was quiet for a moment. That's not nothing, I said, because it wasn't. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't nothing. Dale had built that house with his hands. He had framed it. He had run the plumbing. He had spent weekends on that roof and evenings in that crawl space. And I had brought him coffee and held flashlights and made dinner while he worked. The house existed partly because of him, in a way that the land did not. It's not nothing, Gideon agreed. But it's also not title. A court may award recognition of the labor contribution, a settlement amount. The land itself is not in question. The land cannot be in question. How much? I asked. Okay, I said. There's something else, Gideon said. His attorney made an informal inquiry about your professional relationship to the title office, whether there might be any conflict of interest in how the deed was recorded or transferred. I almost smiled. I didn't, but almost. I didn't record the deed, Gideon. I work in Middlesboro. The deed was recorded in Harlan County by my father's estate attorney in 2021, 2 years before I was a senior examiner, through an office I have no professional affiliation with. I know, he said. I'm telling you because I thought you'd want to know they looked. They looked, I said, and they found a clean record. Absolutely clean, he said, and I could hear in his voice, not satisfaction exactly, but the professional appreciation of a man who has spent 30 years in a field where clean records are rarer than they should be. The night before the formal proceeding, I sat on my mother's porch. It was November by then, the first real cold of the season, and the ridge behind the property had gone past color and into the bare gray-brown of late fall. I had a blanket around my shoulders and a cup of tea I wasn't really drinking, and Vera came out and sat in the other chair without being asked. We didn't talk for a while. The kind of silence between us that isn't empty. Then she said, "Your father would have had something to say about all of this." What would he have said? She thought about it. Something short, she said. Something that would have seemed simple and turned out not to be. I laughed. A real one. The first one in a while. The kind that surprises you by arriving. "Yeah," I said. "That sounds right." She reached over and put her hand on my arm, just for a second, and then took it back. That was the most demonstrative gesture Vera Spalding had made toward me in recent memory, and it landed with the full weight of everything she didn't say. In the morning, I dressed deliberately. Dark navy sweater, the fitted one, the one I had been wearing the day of the lockout, because I had decided I wanted to close this particular loop in the same clothes in which it had opened. Dark jeans, cognac boots, my father's initial around my neck. No rings on any finger. I took my folder. I drove to Corbin on the highway I have driven 100 times, past the exits I have used since I was a teenager, past the hilltop water tower with the name of a town I always read as a kid, even though I could read it with my eyes closed. I notice things I always notice. The farm with the 3 horses that stand near the fence in the cold, the billboard for a personal injury attorney that has been there since before I had a driver's license, the place where the road dips and the valley opens up and you can see for about 4 seconds a long way in every direction. I thought about Dale, not with anger. I had moved through anger months ago and come out on the other side into something cleaner. I thought about who he had been when I first knew him. The man at the hardware store. The man who had driven out to my family's land on a Sunday afternoon and walked the ridge with my father and listened to Eldon talk about the property with what seemed at the time like genuine respect. My father had liked him, not deeply, not unconditionally. My father was not a man who liked people unconditionally, but enough to nod his approval when I told him we were getting married. I wonder sometimes what Eldon saw, whether he knew something was provisional about it, whether the deed of gift, drawn up the year before Dale and I started having problems, which was also the year my father was diagnosed with the illness that would take him 2 years later, was coincidence or preparation. Whether Eldon Spalding, who had spent a lifetime reading Land and People, had understood something about the situation that I was still choosing not to see. I'll never know, but I have the deed. The proceeding itself was held in a conference room at Gideon's office, not a courtroom, because it hadn't escalated to that, because the record was too clean to make a courtroom fight viable for Dale's side. Dale was there with his attorney, a heavyset man named Pruitt, who kept clicking his pen. Dale was in his good flannel, the dark red one, and he had shaved. He looked like a man trying to appear reasonable, which is different from being reasonable, in the same way that looking calm is different from being calm. He didn't look at me when I came in. I sat down. I set my folder on the table. Gideon sat beside me, reading glasses in hand. Pruitt opened with the constructive contribution argument. Dale's labor, Dale's sweat, Dale's weekends on that roof. He spoke for about 6 minutes, and the argument was not without merit. I had already acknowledged to myself that it was not without merit. Then Gideon opened a second folder, one I had not seen the contents of, and slid a document across the table to Pruitt. I looked at Gideon. He looked at me with the particular expression of a man who has been saving something. The document was a lease agreement, or rather, the absence of one. Gideon had obtained confirmation from the county records office that no lease, license, or right of occupancy agreement had ever been filed, recorded, or registered in connection with the residential structure on the Spalding parcel, which meant that Dale's 12-year occupation of a home on land he did not own had never been formalized in any instrument, which meant legally that there was no recorded basis for his claim to remain. Pruitt stopped clicking his pen. The structure, Gideon said, in the quiet voice of a man who has all the time in the world, was built on Ms. Spalding's land, with Ms. Spalding's knowledge and consent during the course of their marriage. We do not dispute the labor contribution. We are prepared to recognize that contribution in the form of a negotiated settlement. He named a number. It was at the lower end of the range he had given me on the phone. Pruitt looked at Dale. Dale was looking at the table. That number, Pruitt said carefully, doesn't reflect the full value of, it reflects the full value of what Mr. Whitmore can legally claim, Gideon said, still quiet, still unhurried, which is the labor, not the land, not the structure as a permanent fixture of land he does not own, the labor. Dale looked up then. He looked at me. The first time he had looked directly at me since I walked in. And I saw something in his face that I had not expected to see and was not entirely prepared for. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even defeat. Not exactly. It was the specific expression of a man who has just understood, fully and finally, the shape of the mistake he made. Not the lockout, not the affair. Something larger and quieter than both of those things. The mistake of spending 12 years next to a woman and never once understanding who she was. And here is the thing I did not expect to feel in that moment. The thing I couldn't have named if you'd asked me to, and couldn't fully name even now. I felt sorry for him. Not enough to change anything, not sorry in the way that rearranges decisions or reopens doors, but sorry in the way you feel sorry for anyone who has walked confidently in the wrong direction for a very long time and has only just realized it. He wasn't a monster. He was a man with a blind spot the size of a property deed, who had spent years believing that proximity was the same as ownership, that presence was the same as claim, that the woman who never made a scene simply had no ground to stand on. He had so much ground to stand on. He just didn't know it was hers. I opened my folder. I didn't need to. Gideon had everything. But I had carried it this far, and I was going to set it on that table. The deed on top, my father's name in the transfer, my name at the bottom, the notary seal in the corner. I did not say anything. I just placed it there. Pruitt looked at it. Dale looked at it. And Gideon looked at me with the reading glasses halfway up his nose and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. The settlement was agreed to within the hour. When it was over, I stood up, I picked up my folder, and I looked at Dale one more time. Not to wound him, not to win, just to close the loop. And I said the only thing I had prepared to say in that room. I hope the next place you live is somewhere your name is on the door. Then I walked out. The hallway of Gideon's office has a window at the end of it that looks out over the parking lot toward a line of oak trees, mostly bare by November, a few last leaves still holding on in the wind. I stood at that window for a moment, and what I felt, standing there with my folder under my arm and my father's initial against my collarbone, was not triumph. It wasn't even relief, not entirely. It was the feeling of a long-held breath, finally, carefully released. I didn't go straight home after. I drove for a while, the county roads, the ones I know well enough to navigate without thinking, the ones that let me cover distance without requiring anything from me. I had the legal pad on the passenger seat and I didn't write anything on it. I just drove. Past the bare fields and the fence lines and the farm with the 3 horses, and I let the proceeding settle into the past tense where it belonged. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from the fight itself, but from how long you held yourself ready for it. 8 months of preparation. 8 months of folders and documents and careful, patient stillness while the situation arranged itself around me. And now it was done. And my body didn't quite know what to do with the absence of the weight it had been carrying. I pulled over once, on a gravel shoulder overlooking a creek I used to fish with my father when I was small. I sat there for about 20 minutes. I watched the water. I didn't think about Dale or the proceeding or the deed. I thought about my father standing in that creek in rubber boots, holding a fishing rod with the absolute patience of a man who understood that some things cannot be hurried, who understood that the best you can do is put yourself in the right position and wait. Then I drove home. In the weeks that followed, I did not seek out information about Dale's situation. I want to be clear about that. I was not monitoring him, not asking around, not feeding on updates. But Harlan County is a small place, and certain things arrive whether you reach for them or not. It was Paulette from the office who told me first, in the oblique way she tells me things, setting the information on the edge of my awareness the way she had set that piece of chocolate on the edge of my desk. Heard the Whitmore contracting business has gone quiet, she said one afternoon, not looking up from her screen. 2 jobs canceled. Word gets around in a small county. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. What had happened, as I understood it in pieces over the following weeks, was the natural consequence of a small community absorbing a story. Dale had positioned himself in the months before the lockout as a man who was moving forward, upgrading, as it were, trading in an old life for a new one. He had been visible about it in the particular way of a man who wants his decision validated by an audience. People had seen Brianna. People had seen the boxes. People had understood what was happening. And then people had found out about the land. In a county where property and family name are not abstractions, but the actual substance of a person's standing, the story of a man who changed the locks on his wife's house while another woman moved in, only to discover the house sat on land he had never owned, land that had been in her family since 1953, land that carried her father's name and his father's name before that. That story traveled. Not loudly, not with malice necessarily, just the way true things travel in places where everyone eventually knows everyone's business. Two of Dale's contracting clients called Gideon's office to confirm details of the property situation because they were considering hiring him for work on their own properties and wanted to understand what they were dealing with. Gideon confirmed only what was a matter of public record, which was everything that mattered. Brianna had moved to Pineville by mid-November. I know this only because her name stopped appearing in connection with the house and the property. I don't know the specific terms of what happened between her and Dale. I don't need to. I think about her sometimes. The pink top, the stacked bracelets, the woman who came looking for something stable and found herself standing on ground that had never been his to offer. I hope she found something real. I mean that without irony. Dale and Brianna did not last the month. I learned this from Corey, Dale's brother, who called me on a Sunday morning in a way I had not expected. Corey and I had always gotten along. He was simpler than Dale in the ways that matter, more direct, less angled. He called to tell me he was sorry, not on Dale's behalf, not as a messenger, just personally, specifically sorry, in the way of a man who had watched something unfold and felt complicit in it by his proximity. I should have called sooner, he said. You're calling now, I said. For what it's worth, he knows he got it wrong. He knows the whole thing, not just the land. I didn't say anything to that for a moment. Then I said, I hope knowing it means something to him. I think it does, Corey said. I think it's going to take him a while to figure out what to do with it. That's his work, I said, not mine. Corey said, yeah, that's fair. And we talked for a few more minutes about nothing important. His kids, the weather, the farm. And then he said goodbye. And I think we both understood that this particular version of our connection was closing, gently and without bitterness, like a door being pulled shut from the inside. Not everyone came back. I want to say that clearly because this is not a story where everything resolves into warmth. There were people in my life, peripheral people, couples we had socialized with as Dale and Renata, friends who were really his friends first and mine by adjacency, who simply receded. No falling out, no dramatic conversation, just the gradual realization that certain names had stopped appearing in my phone, and the further realization that I did not miss them the way I might have expected to. What I did miss, in a way I hadn't fully prepared for, was the version of my life that had felt settled. The house as a place of joint occupation. The ordinary Tuesday evenings of a marriage, however cooled. There is a specific grief in the loss of the life you thought you were living, even when you know, rationally, that the life you were living was already over. Even when you have a folder that proves it. My mother didn't offer me platitudes about this. She offered me practical assistance, help moving my things back into the house, a casserole that appeared on my porch without announcement, and one afternoon in early December, a manila envelope that she carried over from the farmhouse and set on my kitchen table without explanation. I looked at it, her handwriting on the front, my name, and underneath it, from your father, for whenever. I sat down. Inside was a letter, handwritten, Eldon Spalding's precise and slightly cramped script, the same handwriting I had seen on survey notes and deed annotations my whole life. It was dated 18 months before he died. He had written it while he was drawing up the deed of gift. He had written it because he was a man who understood that documents tell you the facts of a situation, but not the meaning of them. And he wanted me to have both. The letter was not long. My father was constitutionally incapable of writing anything long. But there was a paragraph in the middle of it that I have read enough times now that I could recite it from memory. And I want to read it to you exactly as he wrote it. Renata, this land is yours because you are the one who understood what it means. Not because you are my daughter. Being my daughter is an accident of timing. Because you sat in that courtroom when you were 11 years old and you paid attention to what mattered. A person who knows what matters and protects it accordingly is the right person to hold something. I am giving you the land because you already know how to keep it. I sat at my kitchen table with that letter for a long time. My hands were flat on the table on either side of it, the way you hold yourself steady when the ground has shifted. And I thought about being 11 in that velvet collar coat, feet not touching the floor, watching my father's manila folder win. He had seen me there. He had been watching me watch him. And 18 months before he died, he had sat down and written it out so I would know. If that landed for you the way it landed for me, if you felt something in that you can't quite name, I just want you to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It is a small thing, but when I'm sitting here telling you the most important story I know, it matters more than you think to know you're there. The house settled into being mine again in a way that was quieter than I expected. I repainted the bedroom, a color I had wanted for 3 years and had never chosen because Dale preferred the existing white. I moved the kitchen table to a different position, angled toward the window instead of away from it, so that in the mornings I drink my coffee looking out at the ridge rather than at the wall. Small adjustments. The adjustments of a person reclaiming the proportions of her own space. In January, I wrote a letter. Not to Dale. There was nothing left to say to Dale that the legal record hadn't already said more precisely than I could. I wrote to myself. I have a habit of doing this at the close of significant chapters. Not a diary, not a journal, just a letter addressed to the version of me who will read it later, who will need to remember what it felt like to be in this specific moment before the moment became ordinary. I wrote, "You were never waiting to be rescued. You were waiting for the record to catch up to what you already knew. It did. You can rest now." I read it to my mother that evening, sitting on her porch in the January cold with blankets and tea. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your father would have said that was about 12 words too long." I laughed. She almost did. "But he would have meant it," she said. And she reached over and put her hand on my arm. The same gesture as the night before the proceeding. The same brief press of her small hand, Eldon's watch sliding loose at her wrist. "I know," I said. We sat on that porch until the cold got serious and the ridge went black against the last of the sky. And I thought about the wheat stalk wallpaper in the bedroom I had slept in as a girl. The pattern that repeats every 14 inches. The way familiarity is not the same as smallness. The way a thing can be exactly what it always was and also be enough. My name is Renata Spalding. I'm 43 years old. I live on land that has had my family's name on it since 1953, in a house I am learning, room by room, to inhabit as entirely my own. I drink my coffee facing the window now. I keep a legal pad on the passenger seat of my car. I wear my father's initial around my neck every single day. And some mornings, when the light comes over the ridge in that particular way that it does in November and again in March, low and amber and longer than you expect, I stand at the kitchen window and I say, quietly, to no one in the room, "I paid attention to what mattered, Dad, just like you said." Before I go, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it before you answer. Has someone ever quietly protected you, put something in place for you, held something steady on your behalf in a way you only understood much later? A parent, a friend, someone who saw further ahead than you did at the time and made sure you would be all right when you got there. Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and I mean that completely. And if this story stayed with you, if you found yourself in any part of it, whether it was the land or the letter, or just the feeling of finally being exactly where you are supposed to be, like this video, subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and share it with someone who needs to hear that the ground beneath them is steadier than they think. I'll see you in the next one.